Hello, Pearl. Hello, Kavita.
Hi,
Uh,
Amrita. Hi.
Thank you so much for as always, being so gracious in saying yes. Uh, you know, I just really value this relationship, and I'm going to be, going to start with the little bit of an introduction. So the way that the event will flow is, I will quickly take 5 to 7 minutes. I will do an introduction of myself, what Invisible Scars is. I will introduce Pearl. I will introduce Kavita, and there is a short disclaimer I would like to read out to all of you before we begin the event, and then we will go straight on to the question and answers. Keep sending us your questions on chat. Um, so, quick little bit about myself. My name is Ekta. I have 25 plus years of work experience across entrepreneurship and corporate roles, largely in business development and marketing. I moved into the social sector about 7 years back, and since then, there's been no looking back. I founded two initiatives. One is called Invisible Scars, which is a support group for those who are facing domestic abuse, and the second is Porn Viram, where we talk about rape and rape culture. I believe very strongly in behavioral changes, and I feel that a lot of what we do can drive behavioral changes. And I'm very fortunate to have lovely people to work with. My Choices Foundation is one of the organizations that we work with. It's an NGO, and I shared the link with everyone at the beginning of the webinar session, when you are hearing that lovely music. So if you want to get in touch with them, their website link as well as their contact details were there. And apart from all of this, I'm a part of the Cyberabad Society for Cyberabad Security Council, a not-for-profit called Sahi, and I'm one of the members of the Thai Women Entrepreneur Group. So that's a little bit about me. I will make this really quick. I don't want to waste too much time on introductions. Invisible Scars, like I said, it's a support group for people who are facing domestic abuse. We are online. We are geographically agnostic. We don't believe in helping people from any particular location. Anyone who reaches out to us, we help them. We work with other NGOs, professionals, to get whatever help we can to our members. That's the format we work in. We have a website. It's www.invisiblescars.in. You could look us up. Although our focus is largely on emotional and psychological violence, yet of course anybody who comes to us is more than welcome. We are gender agnostic. We don't believe in doing things only for one gender. We attempt to do what we can for everyone. However, as an NGO and based in India, we do have our limitations. However, we try to be as fair and as gender agnostic as possible. We believe in the power of counseling and therapy, and which is the reason you are seeing us here today, to discuss things that you don't normally hear about. You may read them in an article or find them in a video, but you really don't know how to associate them to abuse. And we are hoping that everyone who comes in touch with us has the chance at a better life. Um, so that's a little bit about Invisible Scars. I'm going to introduce this is a monologue, so I'm just going to introduce Pearl, my first panelist for today. Pearl is the head of interventions at My Choices Foundation. And she's part of an initiative within My Choices called Operation Peacemaker. So Pearl is heading the interventions at Operation Peacemaker, and she has been a mentor counselor overseeing the best practices of her entire counseling team. Pearl is deeply passionate about helping people help themselves. So she is helping people actually help themselves. She is armed with a master's in psychology and a specialization in counseling. And she feels that serving domestic violence clients has been the most gratifying experience of her life. So that's my first panelist, Pearl. Welcome, Pearl.
Thank you very
My second panelist is Kavita. Kavita is a senior counselor at My Choices Foundation, Operation Peacemaker. She has a postgraduate diploma in counseling psychology. So a lot of you on this call also today would be directly in contact with Kavita. And she is driven by her personal experience, and the life changing potential that counseling brings with it. She says that counseling in the scenario of domestic violence is very different and challenging, and she is privileged to have an opportunity to work in an area which is close to her heart. She is also a trained professional in Hindustani classical music, and loves to travel. She has two beautiful daughters. And Kavita, my favorite part of your profile is the 4-year-old pug called Benji, who she says rules her life. So, welcome on board, Kavita. Welcome, Pearl. Before we start the event today, I'm actually going to read out a short disclaimer. So when we do these webinars, we have your best interests at heart. The idea is for everyone to take away something from the webinar, something useful. Either you can use it for yourself or you can use it to help someone. However, this disclaimer is going to speak directly to survivors of domestic abuse. The webinar is a small attempt to understand a complex field. It's a very small attempt. If someone who's watching this webinar thinks that you will get into a difficult situation at home, please note that this webinar can be accessed later too. It can be viewed at your convenience and your safety. So if you think someone is going through abuse, or someone might need your help, or you might need help, please be a little courteous and careful when you put in comments on the webinar. This is an observation, a small disclaimer for everyone's safety. Uh, so here we go with all our introductions and niceties before we begin. So I'm going to start with both Pearl and Kavita, and I'm going to tell you that a lot of times the most important question that we hear from survivors is, how do I know that I am facing conflict or I am facing abuse? Because when they go back, if they do feel that there's something wrong in what is happening to them, and they do go back and they ask people for their inputs, family members or friends, everyone kind of tries and tells them, why don't you adjust a little bit? This is just a conflict, try and work it out, tone yourself down, don't talk so loudly, don't shout, don't fight. So my first question is, how do we know it is a conflict? How do we know whether it is an abuse or it is a conflict? Anyone can take the question.
Yeah, Kavita, go.
I'll take that question. So first, let's understand a conflict in a relationship may be defined as any kind of disagreement, including an argument or an ongoing series of disagreements. For example, about how to spend money, how to maybe carry out certain things, certain chores in the house. It could be something where even though these are about day-to-day life, these conflicts can be extremely stressful, but addressing this can also act as a way of clearing the air, surfacing issues that need discussion. So conflict, this is the definition of conflict. And let's see the difference when we say abuse. Domestic abuse is a pattern of behavior where one partner gets his or her needs met at the expense of the other. This is the difference. This is the core difference. The needs are met at the expense of the other through the use of power and control, usually has elements of intimidation and often produces trauma and violence. The survivor is related to the abuser through marriage, blood relation, or a live-in relationship. This discussion also includes dating relationships.
Okay.
So now getting into the behavior patterns. Is that okay, Ekta? Can I go ahead with the behavior patterns?
Yes. And if we have any questions, I'm sure the audience can always ask us on the chat box, and we can address it while we are answering a question.
Yeah. So the behavioral pattern that to recognize abuse is the initial stages. The abuser will typically sweep the survivor off their feet. It's almost like too good to be true, and soon they'll be blamed and told that they're not enough. Also, the survivor will believe that they're really not enough and can't amount to anything in life. And the abuser will try to alter those unique traits of the survivor that make them what they are. For example, change a bubbly person into a morose individual by coercion, almost making them look at their innate nature as something which is a fault. It is not, because it, according to their opinion, it's not correct, quote unquote. Isolation, they try to gain control by isolating them from the support systems, that is usually from the core family, good friends. These are the first indications that you are in an abusive relationship for the survivor, and these are the tactics that are used. So it could be family, friends, children, organization, financial resources, and make them dependent on the abuser. So they scream, yell, and curse at the survivor, showing them their imperfections and mistakes. So they kind of feel miserable all the time, and there is a constant denial of the abuse. And another, generally putting it across, simply putting it across, is when you feel disrespected and there's a constant nagging feeling of being ridiculed. Like you're constantly not, almost your self-respect is on the line all the time. And intimacy by force. There's no respect even in intimacy. No control over one's own earnings. Physical violence are all the red flags. That anything that makes you feel uncomfortable and leaves you feeling desolate and helpless could indicate the signs of you being in an unhealthy relationship. And this may indicate you being in an abusive relationship. So an unhealthy relationship is an abusive relationship. Constantly you're being made to feel you are at fault of the abusive behavior. This is a very, very important trait. This you cannot miss. I'm sure people who have dealt with this or come across people who are going through domestic violence will know that it's always your fault. Whether it's he or she, here we are being fair to both the genders, but it's almost like the survivors made to feel that only in your presence I'm like this. So whether it is the abuser, for everything you're made to feel you're the cause of it, the trigger of it.
Interesting. I just kind of got a couple of points when you were talking, is that so when there is a conflict, that's kind of healthy in a relationship. It should be there because it gives you a space to disagree with each other.
Absolutely.
And there is some sort of rainbow at the end of the road.
Yes.
Know that okay, the conflict will get resolved and we'll be back together. However, in abuse, you say it's very unhealthy and it leaves one person feeling drained out, intimidated, humiliated, with all sorts of negative feeling. So would that be kind of fair to say? And in the middle, Kavita, we got a question from Megha, who says, how do we know that we are safe after we end the silence? Most of the DV survivors are murdered by their husbands. So Pearl, Kavita, would you like to take this question quickly?
Should we take all the questions towards the end? Ekta, that will be helpful.
I think that would be a good idea. So we will take this question towards the end. So Megha, we will answer this question. So right now, what we wanted to understand is, because abuse is so, sometimes it's so deceitful, you can't even make out it's abuse. What kind of abusers are there, and what kind of violent partners have you seen in your experience in this field?
To actually answer your question, Ekta, I think I'll take it a little before and actually look at why do people abuse, which is $1 million question for everybody. And as we said, we are just attempting to answer this vast subject in a nutshell. So according to that, I mean, why people abuse is, many factors are there which are biological, which have psychological and social levels of influences. And all these are correlated in intimate partner violence. And yet prominent theoretical models are having a narrow focus sometimes. And through this forum, along with other researchers, we're trying to reiterate the importance of this biopsychosocial model, where we are trying to be integrative and coherent. And the richness of different perspectives highlights the need to avoid simplistic responses, because there is no one short answer for such a big problem. And to touch base on that, the first would be the biological or the physiological factors or reasons for it. So we can take it back in the biological section to um, incidents like brain injuries to people, neuropsychological factors like disrupted neurodevelopment, trauma exposure, and genetic predisposition too. Coming to the psychological model, traumatic experiences in childhood have been linked to the potential for violence in adults and to vulnerability also to adult psychiatric disorders.
Hmm.
On it's like on the bipolar disorder, which we will be actually talking a little later into the topic, has been linked to both traumatic childhood experience and to the potential for violence. These risk levels of an abuser are further elevated by comorbidity of substance abuse disorders. So they just add fuel to the fire if something is added to it, like a substance abuse disorder, like alcoholic addiction, drug addiction, anything. And coming to the sociological model, factors that perpetuate violence, if we take only the cultural factors, which is one among the many, there are many. And in that, if we try to just understand a bit of it, you can see that gender specific socialization, cultural definitions of appropriate sex roles, how each sex has to behave like that, expectations of roles within relationships, belief in inherent superiority of males sometimes, notion of the family as a private sphere and under male control, customs of marriage, bride, um, dowry, dowry aspect to acceptability of violence as a means to resolve conflict. That's also a cultural thing. And women's economic dependence on men, limited access to education and training for women are few of the many causes of gender-based violence. And each theory provides a logical explanation of understanding domestic abuse and contributes for a very valuable perspective. It's not that we take out one thing and if you understand, oh, are you saying this? Or are you meaning only that if you take only culturally and try to cover, it becomes very narrow.
Correct.
Having said that, not all people who have these issues abuse their partners, Ekta.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Want to explain, for example, if an individual's parents, both mom and dad, are diabetic or have cardiovascular disease, their offspring definitely is at high risk of acquiring the disease.
Correct.
But at the same time, they can reverse the pathway by making lifestyle changes.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
It's not that it's hard and fast rule that they need to be diabetic.
Correct.
So, but the same way, we have so many examples of good spouses that had one or more of the above markers.
But eventually did not end up as abusive spouses.
Abusive people.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. So what I understood, Pearl, just to kind of wrap it up in a nutshell, was that there are three types of factors that influence abusive behavior. One is the psychological factors, the other are sociological factors, and the third are biological factors.
Yes.
And it is usually a combination of these that lead to people getting abused.
Yes.
In fact, when you said something about culture, and you said that sometimes people feel in culture it's okay to be violent and explain a point, there was a video that I saw, I think a couple of days back, where every time we wanted our remote to work, there was someone who was hitting the remote to make it work. Then you want your radio to work, so you're hitting the radio to kind of get it to work. And that is how they kind of translated that entire thing into a video on how, when things don't work for you in the family front, you actually try and use the same kind of force, or hit things or beat people up to get them to fix things. Yes. So a very, very, very interesting point. Thank you so much for that point. So probably this is the question that leads to the question that what kind of abusers are there, because now that we've understood the factors that influence abuse, it would be probably better understood what kind of abusers are there.
Yeah, I think I'll allow Kavita to talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, carrying it forward from what Pearl was mentioning, that violent partners, abusers come from all social groups, ethnic groups, and professions. However, if we carefully watch out for certain behavior and attitudinal markers, it can help us in recognizing a potential abusive person and avert impending relationship disaster. That is, you can see the cues, you can, be aware. So that's what we're trying to, kind of put it across in this webinar, to make survivors realize what, if there is a way to avoid, and to see the red flags early enough. So there has been research in this as far as domestic violence and why people abuse, and so on and so forth, by researchers and clinicians like Dutton, Holsworth, Monroe, and Stewart, argued that 3 specific forms of personality disorders were prevalent among wife assaulters, and they were antisocial, borderline, and over controlled. So these are a series of studies he described, and the profile of an abuser correlate with the cluster B personality disorders according to the DSM. So what we will try to understand is the antisocial personality disorder, for is a person who has a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others. So there is no empathy for the other. So I will explain this antisocial personality disorder of a person who's abusive. Will a scenario could be like this. An example is where the survivor is a very bubbly person and by nature, and but an abusive partner can make the trait of a survivor look like a fault, and thus slowly start destroying her innate nature to fit his definition of being social. And this could happen with both sexes, and thus control the social interactions. So because when you define what is enough for a social interaction, you will say the other person, or also the survivor, is forced to take on that definition. So it could be like simple derogatory comments like, oh, I saw the way that you were, that guy was looking at you while you were talking so freely in the party. I observed this. I think you wanted that response. This kind of a statement really is almost like it does the survivor in, because it leaves the survivor thinking completely in self-doubt. And then if this continues over a long period of time, then the survivor could likely retreat into a shell. And that is the fear of what happens when they come from this particular personality disorder, what effect it has on the survivor. So for example, borderline personality disorder have a pervasive pattern of instability in relationships, unclear and shifting self-image, identity, behavior, and affects, often leading to self-harm and impulsivity. So this is their characteristics of a borderline personality disorder. So the example is a survivor could slowly start feeling very claustrophobic in the relationship because of this particular disorder that the abuser has. And here, an interesting point which we have seen is self-harm is used as a way to coerce and instill fear in the survivor. Survivor is always walking on eggshells. Like, pata nahi when I will say something or do something which could trigger the abusive reaction. So she's swinging from being very loving. The abuser could be very loving at one point, and just when the survivor is not least expecting it, the abuse could come on.
Correct.
So the survivor finds it very difficult to come out, as they are made to remember. This is a very important point, that they are made to remember the loving side they displayed constantly by the abuser. You remember I took you onto that holiday? Who suggested that? You remember? I bought you that diamond ring. So it is this kind of, the conflict. It leaves the survivor very confused. And so am I being wrong? Am I being a very, these are the questions that a survivor is likely to ask. I mean, am I being so selfish that I mean, my husband, or the husband says the wife is being so nice. So either way.
Correct.
And the narcissistic personality is another of these disorders where they could turn out to be abusers in a domestic relationship, because they have a pervasive pattern of grandiosity and a constant need for admiration. So it's all about I, me, myself, and a complete lack of empathy. So here, the survivor feels very small constantly in the relationship. So it's almost as if, you know, she could have accomplished things. She could be earning a lot. She could be actually sometimes even running the household financially also. But survivor can never hope, quote unquote, to be enough in the eyes of the abuser. It's never enough. The abuser conditions the survivor, especially after several years of living in the abusive relationship, that she is the problem, she's the bad one. And this could slowly lead the survivor into oblivion, almost slips away into oblivion.
Right.
And this role of submission, the very interesting part here, this is also some of the possibilities. Like whenever we are stating these things, it's not a rule, but these are some of the stories or the incidents that we have come into contact with. So the survivor slips into a role of submission, and sometimes even finds themselves saying they are like that because they are an ideal partner to the abuser. So this is like, it's almost packaged for the survivor. The whole submission is packaged and presented to her as her asset, her goodness, and usually a partner to this kind of an abuser will always say they have accomplished much more had they realized earlier that the abusive pattern was not healthy. When we question them, when we highlight them, what is it that you could have, because you already show so much, you already are a high achiever. So they always feel that it is this space, this confusion that left them thinking whether they were right, why they were not enough. And it is almost like the abusive, they realized too late that it was a premeditated attempt to make the survivor know their place. Usko apni jagah malum hona chahiye. So so these disorders display characteristics that involve grandiose delusions and a self-inflated sense of importance, which are critical behaviors for an abuser to have in order to maintain strict and severe control over their partner. So the abuser also needs to have a very low affect and low sense of empathy. So they don't have any remorse for the abuse and actions they're inflicting on their partner. And all these qualities are the features found on the Access to Disorders under DSM-4. So abusers may aim to avoid household chores or exercise total control over family finances. We hear so many cases where, the wife could be earning sometimes even a higher salary, or and the finances are run by the spouse, and they can be manipulative, often recruiting friends, law officers, court officials, even the partner's family to their side while shifting the blame to the partner. This happens in a lot of high level of narcissistic personalities. They almost, present a different picture of themselves, even to the client's family, and the client's family are constantly, the survivor's family is constantly trying to say that, are you almost doubting her, whether what she's feeling is genuinely, abusive or not. They deny the violence and abuse or rationalize it. So perpetrators are usually concerned with their reputation and image in the community. So their abuse will be very, very carefully played out in such a manner that the survivor is always made aware that she dare not do certain things. So colleagues, co-workers, bosses, friends, extended family, so they use in the public the specific forms of denial, family honor structure, like they instill this in the survivor. The survivor is made to survive in the abuse under the guise of these, created norms for making sure the abuse never gets out of the four walls of the home.
Correct. Yes. So actually, what you're saying is very, very true, because whenever we talk to survivors who come to us, one of the very important things that they always, most cases they say is, my spouse is very good, but at their workplace, they are wonderful people. Nobody is going to believe what I say. People are not going to believe what I say. So there's always that thing. What actually, one of the reasons we wanted to discuss this point was to kind of make some people feel that all of this is a remorseless, it is done due to lack of empathy,
Empathy.
and the person who is doing it actually knows that they are doing it, which is why they intersperse the good phases with the bad phases, so that they can always refer to the good phases whenever a bad phase comes and say, okay, you know what, I did this for you like 5 years ago, you should be obligated, instead you are fighting with me, or instead you are pulling up, you're digging up old fights. So I think it makes a lot of sense. At this point, I would also like to ask our attendees who are there, that if there is something you don't understand, yes, definitely this is a deep dive into an abuser behavior, so there will be some jargons that we will use which you may not understand. In case there's something like that, please feel free to put it on the chat box. We will explain maybe in a slightly easier way if there's something you don't understand. However, we go ahead thinking that if there's something you don't understand, you will definitely look for it, Google it, search, and understand what is meant. But please do ask us if you feel there's something you don't understand. So just to kind of bring this, one of my friends was going, I believe she would have been going through domestic abuse, but she's no longer in touch with us, and somebody I've grown up in my childhood with. And once she got married, she kind of started getting isolated from all of us, and so much so that we were not even allowed to call her at home. So one of the times when she came back to her parents' place without her husband, she managed to tell us a couple of things. In one of the incidences, she was standing at a phone booth, and at those times we used to have these PCO phone
Yeah.
booths. And the husband wanted to make a call to somebody, and he asked her to stand outside the booth. And she stood there waiting for him. And when you're idle, you just keep looking around, and she was just looking around. And probably there was a set of 4 or 5 men who were standing close by. And after he made his call, he came out, and he actually harassed her for days, saying that I saw the way you were watching those men, and they were standing there because of you. And it was so funny, because she did not even realize that there were people standing there. She was just staring around in blank space. And today we are no longer in touch with her, because there is no way that we can see into the life of this person, and we are not even allowed to call her. She doesn't keep in touch with us. The calls that come are usually to ask for money. And despite the fact that we've tried to bring this up, these are things you don't bring up directly, you always ask via. So I just wanted to, when you said that they would blame you for behaviors, so it kind of stuck there in my mind that this is what happened. Yes, yes. Mm. So Megha says, according to me, like you said, many of them are not aware about the domestic abuse. Even if they are aware of the abuse, they choose to stay because their kids, or they're too comfortable in this abusive behavior, or they're scared what happens when she ends her silence. Yes, definitely, Megha. I feel these are definitely fears, and we will talk more along the way. The next question, I would like to ask Kavita, because we have these horror stories of people who want to stay back in relationships, because first of all, we don't have a culture where we encourage breaking of relationships. So a lot of people are very scared to kind of go against that culture, lest someone looks upon them, and we still have these things. So what does an abuser ever improve? I mean, what do we wait for? So a lot of people say, no, I don't want to leave, this person is a bad spouse but a good parent, I don't want to leave. Maybe this person will improve, I will do something to improve, I will give so much love, or maybe when I have kids, this person will improve. So we see a lot of this. Can you please then tell us, does an abuser actually ever improve? Well, would you like to take
Yeah,
that?
yeah, Ekta, I will do that. Ekta, This is also a very tricky question. But if the person who is abusing realizes the need to change, the deeper level of damage that their behavior is causing them, and do not wish to go down that road, then the prognosis is better. And for this, a four-pronged model of change. I mean, what we at My Choices each time try to do is we try to think of all the factors which we can bring in to help the person who is abusing. And one thing to remember here is right that outright shaming them, I mean, making them a public spectacle, is never helpful. And yeah, having said that, we must confront the perpetrator, showing them the damage they're causing through their abuse. But the whole approach and posture should be one of listening, helping, and healing. And things to do for the person who is abusing is through counseling, the focus would be on equipping them with behavior modification techniques, conflict resolution skills. So if when you're saying that if should I continue to stay with him, if somebody agrees for these or if they're willing to go through these, they will be, I mean, better equipped. So anger, impulse regulation can be learned. So someone said, try not to blurt out the first thing that comes to the mind. Do an internal editing process and see how you can communicate the same thing without spewing venom. So this is something which they can learn or be worked upon during the counseling sessions. Trauma treatment by a specialist, where because I brought out the biopsychosocial model here, the psychological assessment and the medication, if need be, should also be looked at as a supportive treatment, because here, Ekta, we are looking at a bouquet of services. And all these things, the substance abuse treatment, the relapse prevention has to be also addressed. So all these factors give some strength to the perpetrator to stop their unhealthy coping mechanisms and learn the right coping mechanisms, while we are helping the abuser to improve and eventually become a healthy partner. We also have to enable the survivor to be a change agent in the perpetrator's journey. So this is one aspect where we are working on the person who is abusing, it's abuser. Another point I would like to bring out is the things to do for the person who is abused. So the survivor also has to do certain things, not just the person who is abusing. The more the partner tolerates, the more abuse gets reinforced. So the partner has to be equally working on how to be assertive and set boundaries, while the abuser is going through his therapy or her therapy to modify their behavior. So both the abuser and their partner have issues, and hence they play roles which reinforce each other's unhealthy traits. Another point I would like to make, a third pronged in the four-pronged approach, the third point is children of such families should also be helped. There are actually pictures where the brain images were taken, children who children of domestic violent parent, their brain scans show exactly like a warlike situation. So if it is compared to children who are living in a war zone, the children who live here in our top-notch houses, attending the top-notch schools might be, but with domestic violence, their brain scans show the same way, just like a warlike situation. Always fearful, uncertain about their next minute, what happens. And they succumb to the tactics of the abusive partner. And the kids also pick up unhealthy habits. And they believe, the kids also believe that, I mean, it's a factor that kids who are victims of violence may learn to believe that the violence is a reasonable way to resolve conflict. And who see the violence directed against women are more likely to abuse women when they grow up. And girls who witness domestic violence in their families of origin are more likely to be victimized by their own husbands. So they fall a prey to that too. And last but not the least, my favorite point is parents of both sides and significant family members should be also supportive. So all of us who are attending here will definitely fall in one of these categories. I mean, like either we are bystanders, we are going through, or we are abusing. And these parents should involve less and less in their children's families. And parents also should stop blaming the person who is already abused with statements like, you didn't do enough for your marriage. You need to make your relationship work. You're actually a failure if you can't handle. I mean, these statements are told for both men and women. And start encouraging the abuser also to seek support rather than cover up their ills. And what happens if you just cover up? It'll only become more cancerous in nature and harmful in the end. So no, my son is not wrong. My daughter is not wrong. If you go into that approach rather than helping, and then the whole system will collapse. So that's the reason Ekta we says that we use this four-pronged approach. And if it works out, and if we work out a methodology like this, again I reiterate, for an effective response. Ekta, you there? Ekta, you're muted.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
think it's better now. Sorry. Yeah. So what I understood, Pearl, was that an abuser, there is a chance that the abuser changes,
Yes.
despite so many factors driving this whole abusive relationship. But it needs a lot of work from the side of the abuser, from the side of the survivor, and
Yes.
for the children who are part of that relationship.
And also the family and
And the
significant
family,
members.
yes.
Friends.
Because we have seen in a lot of cases what happens is, if there is abuse and a victim goes back to their family and says, okay, I'm being abused, the family comes and intervenes and actually worsens the whole situation,
Absolutely.
rather than trying to get professional help, to say that, I think we have this thing where we want to solve all our issues ourselves. We don't believe in going to professionals. And I would say that in this case, when there is a situation like this, if a child in your family comes up, whether it's a male child or a female child, and says, I'm being abused, please stop and listen and reach out to a professional rather than trying to sort it out yourself.
Absolutely.
Because you might actually end up messing the situation even more than it already was. So thank you for that answer, Pearl, because it is a very hopeful answer. It is not
Yes.
something that says that change is not possible.
Yes.
Definitely change is possible. And instead of becoming enemies and saying that no, this is not going to happen, so sometimes what happens is women who are being abused, they become very, very bitter towards men, or vice versa, men who are hurt by women become very bitter towards. So professional help is always available. This is something that I want to reiterate again and again. Don't try and solve it amongst yourselves. If you feel that it's really not working out, do go for professional help, because there is a chance that things can improve. And wouldn't you like to take that chance? Why would
Very
you
true.
like things to be bad, especially when there are children involved in a relationship? It is not fair to the child in the relationship to have be in a situation like that. So I think that's a very hopeful kind of an answer. So one of the questions, okay, so we are getting questions. Sorry, I will just stop here,
Sure.
and I will definitely, we will answer the questions. Uh, okay, Ruchika is asking a question: how to convince an abuser to go for professional help? Ruchika, we had this question last week in our webinar. You could join us on the Facebook group. My name is Ekta Vivek Verma, and if you connect with me on Facebook, I will add you to our group. The recording of the webinar is there, and we have in detail answered this question. But just to kind of tell you that this is not something that you have to convince an abuser to go. You will have to do it as a journey with them together. So you have to lead them by taking up, doing this yourself and convincing them how you benefited out of it. And there's a longer answer on the other webinar. So please do connect with me on Facebook, and I'll add you to the group so you can watch the webinar accordingly. So going back to our this thing, and I'm kind of asking, what should a person who's stuck with an abuser do? So I'm stuck in this relationship which is seemingly dead end and it's not going anywhere. I'm not feeling good. Probably the other person, I don't know how the other person is because I'm usually clueless about how the other person is. What is it that I should do in such a relationship?
Uh, can I take that?
Yeah, Ekta. Sorry,
Yeah,
Kavita.
so taking it forward from where you left off, Ekta, saying that counseling is a very good first option because, even if the couple together, the survivor can take the initiative and go look at counseling as an option, because that could be a good start for the survivor. Whether the abuser joins in at that point, we don't know, but that doesn't mean that as an individual a survivor need not look at counseling as an option just because the abuser is not part of the journey initially. So you you know you could even model the behavior, like your assertiveness or whatever you would like to, you will learn through the counseling process that you will go through when you go to a counselor, could also motivate the abuser to maybe look at it as an option, at least out of curiosity. So if you put it across saying that, I got somebody who listened to my part of it, so wouldn't you want someone to listen to your part too? So that would be a good way to pitch the counseling as an option to the partner who's unwilling to look at that as an option. The next is educate yourself. There is so much material nowadays available, like the domestic violence cycle of power and control, the cycle of violence is available, and which clearly indicates the traits on how an abuser controls the survivor. All the aspects that are taken, children are used as weapons, children are, you know, there's, small examples, like, to make you, put you in your place, like you have given birth to the child, but I'm going to teach you how you don't have a control of what you do or the children do. Even if you have a plan for them, I'll make sure that I'll mess it up. So this is one way. The power and control wheel is so explicit in the way the different methods that are used to gain control by using power. So this is something which is which a survivor can educate themselves, they can get to know, and this would be part of the counseling process. But even if the counseling process is not their first option, reading up material about this could motivate them to look at counseling as an option, and then they could take a well informed decision to be in this relationship or leave the relationship. Get information on what options are available, as what are the legal options, what are the counseling options, and be well informed. And once you handle your fears and change the narrative played in the head, that am I doing this right, is this right for the children, a lot of survivors say they put up with the abuse for the sake of the children, and then they need to understand, which a counselor or a therapist will make them understand, that staying in an abusive relationship only teaches the children there's almost no divide between abuse and love. It goes hand in hand. So it's not a very healthy atmosphere for a child to grow. So it's almost like abuse permission is given. In the name of control, you can abuse. There is permission given. Abuse is normalized. And then when we are working with survivors, I always tell them, how will you be able to control or to correct them? Not even control. There's no need to control. But how will you even be able to tell your child that abuse is wrong tomorrow when he does it to his girlfriend or she does it to her boyfriend? Or how will you be able to? I mean, you will cut a sorry figure. Because if you were so well informed and so you had an authority to identify abuse, why did you not take better care of yourself? So that from there comes the disrespect, which is almost like a fallout of staying in a relationship which is abusive. So the reason I hear this so many times, that the children will get affected, and this is more because the abuser plans this out, that the children are very clingy to them, or they see them as a very positive thing in the family atmosphere, but it's also going hand in hand by abusing the survivor. So can you imagine how confusing it is for a child who's growing up, who have their own challenges, whether they are little ones, whether they are teenagers, whether they are deciding what path to take in their life, academically, personally, professionally, whatever. This is so confusing, whatever is happening on the home front. So the counseling process, the knowledge, the psycho education that you will get with regard, and this is not coming from you, me, or Pearl, this is coming from a well researched clinicians and researchers who worked on this subject extensively. So whatever we are sharing with today is coming from there. So if they understand this, then that they will realize that they deserve to lead an abuse-free life. They do not deserve this. Then intuitively, they will start doing things to ensure that abuse will not continue, as they would have learned how to draw boundaries and become more assertive.
Good. So I think one of the critical points, Kavita, that I picked up from what you're saying is educating yourself is very important.
Very
one of the strongest weapons when you feel that you're stuck in an abusive relationship is to educate yourself. I think the journey towards healing begins with acceptance. So the first thing is to accept that you might be in an abusive situation, then read up and understand about your situation. If you can't read up, reach out to someone who knows about domestic abuse and who understands it better. Try and find out what you are going through, understand. One of the things I feel sometimes missing with a lot of abuse victims who do reach out to me, survivors, sorry, not victims, is the fact that they don't understand the law. So many of them will have hundreds of questions around pre-assumed ideas of what the legal system will do to you. You read an article that says that somebody was not given justice, and you kind of put it on yourself and say, instead of, and you feel that that justice won't be served to you.
Yes.
Instead of actually trying to go out and see that there are many, many cases that get resolved, and people do get back to having better lives, even if they take the route of separation, even if they work on their marriage. There are definitely positives to it. But my only sort of request to everyone who's a survivor or who is helping a survivor is to ensure that they understand what they are going through. Help is always available. As long as you ask for it, there will always be people to help. Now here we say, what should I do if I'm stuck with an abuser, right? And that has kind of given us you've kind of given us an overview of how counseling can help. But what are the steps I can actually take, if I'm stuck with an abuser, apart from educating myself, or, kind of being, in that situation? How do I really help? What are the steps I can take, say, report or things like that?
So, Paul, shall I go ahead?
Yeah.
So usually there is an option of reaching out to a women's police station or a local police station, which will eventually direct you to a women's police station which is in your neighborhood, and report the case, which will be registered as a complaint initially, and under the 498 Act. So this will be what the complaint will be registered under, and then the process of counseling will start, where the police will direct you to a counseling center, or they will have their own counseling facilities, a counselor available, and then you will be the husband will also be brought on board, and then a kind of understanding of the problem, and then whether any deeper interventions are required, whether the problem is very severe, and the counselor would be able to identify if there is any disorders which have to be addressed by medical professionals, or any, depending on what the client is ready to take. So initially a lot of time is given for the client to understand, recognize the abuse, and then with this information, she goes home thinking about what are the options open for her. This is through the police stations. Then through the legal process, you have the DVC, Act, where you can approach the courts directly, and you can file your case, where you can, your case will be heard. You'll have to employ a lawyer, and you'll have to, under this comes all the aspects of maintenance, and your child custody, and the domestic violence is also addressed in this. So these are the two main options that a person who is going through domestic violence will have, the recourse which will be available for them legally. But a counseling approach, a family counseling center like one of ours, or any of the counseling centers which which are like even Barosa is there, and the other institutions, governmental agencies are also there. So these, basically it is to understand and then read up the DV Act 2005, which is freely available on the net.
Yes.
Lot of us Google, but Google the right stuff. Just
Yes.
read the act, read the DVC Act 2005, which is available in a PDF form, which is so expansive and so explicitly given about what the rights of a woman are, what are the different kinds of abuse, what are the provisions that are available for her legally.
Yeah,
So
different
once
reliefs available.
really, and whatever, you can, what are the things that you can approach? Well, you can add.
Yeah. Just wanted to add to what Kavita said is the main difference between the 498A Act and the Domestic Violence Act is 498 Act is an IPC. So directly you file it at a police station with an FIR, and usually the consequences are right now today are not immediate jail. Definitely, as Kavita said, you go through the counseling process mostly for reconciliation, and if the abuse is continuous and there is a repeat offender, only then it is FIR. Taking this road of the DV Act, this is a civil act where the most of the time, actually in most of the cases, no woman would like to see that her relationship should break, her husband should be in jail, and only then her heart is contented and happy. No. So all the time, I mean, I think almost every woman, barring very few who struggled a lot, have said they wanted the abuse to end, not the relationship to end. So actually, for that reason, the DVC Act came in place, which is a civil act, and it has exactly the reliefs. Why we use the word reliefs here is the woman is looking for relief. She wants protection, that she should not be abused, but want to continue the relationship. She wants to stay in the house. She doesn't like to be told that word, this is my house, get out of this house. So she has the right to stay in that shared household. She has the right for custody of children whenever that is snatched away. So they get a temporary custody through this DVC Act. There is also a compensation provided if she undergoes any kind of loss, financial loss, or health issue because of the abuse. So all these are different laws. Maintenance also is available through this relief. So these are all the different reliefs under which Domestic Violence Act. And if after serving the notice, I mean, if the person, abuser, is not adhering to the judge's orders, only then next steps will be taken, like filing a case on him. So the initial steps would not be a case and jail and so on and so forth, which every woman wants it. Even that's the most of the women, and that's the reason this act came in place.
So we did deviate a bit off topic,
Yes.
When we came to the DV Act. But one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is that it's so important that we understand that domestic abuse does require you to step out and talk.
Yes.
A lot of people who come to me, Kavita and Paul, they always tell me, I don't want the police to touch my husband. I just want them to explain to him, why is he doing all this? Can he not understand how much hurt he's causing me? So it's like a lot of disappointment with the relationship, and that is the reason we are doing this today, so that people understand that part of it is behavioral, part of it could be sociological, part of it could be biological. It is very important to understand, get professional help, and get to the bottom of what is happening.
Yes.
To understand. I think we will stop with our questions here. We are almost at 5, and we'll probably take another 10 minutes and do the question answers from the audiences. We don't want to overstretch like last time. Somebody, anonymous attendee says, why does a person abuse even when he had a loving relationship? Also having financial dependencies, and also from outsiders' perspective sees a future. Okay, so I think the question is, why does a person abuse even when he had a loving relationship?
Yeah, Ekta, I would like to go for this, and Kavita, you can also add if I'm missing any point.
Sure.
I think we come back to the same description of, it is not just loving relationship. If you come back to the biopsychosocial model, it could be one of these factors. So we are happy that he has at least a good family background. So we can say that the chances are really good if you take support and see if many of those other factors are at play, and rule out that, and that will be a better answer for this.
Correct.
Any thoughts, both of you?
One of the situations I did face, Pearl, is someone did come and speak to me about their parent being very abusive. So one of the parents was very abusive towards the other, and there was a lot of verbal violence, so to say. And later on, when they went through counseling and they went through the whole process, eventually the partner who was abusive was diagnosed as someone with bipolar disorder. And it turned out that they did not actually in some situations have control over a lot of their actions.
Yeah.
And then this family went ahead and sought proper medication and counseling for the mother, and proper treatment for the person who was abusive. So I think, yes, you make a very valid point there, that it is so important to understand that there could be other factors in play as
Yes.
well.
And one less factor to deal with, because at least he had a good background, when the participant mentioned that they had a good family background.
Family background. Correct. Kulkarni asks, does the abuser do it knowingly, deliberately, or it becomes normal behavior and they do not even understand that it is done?
Kavita?
Shall I go, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's as we said, there are certain personality disorders which we spoke about quite explicitly in the webinar, and apart from that, abuse is a learned behavior. So for as I was telling you, Ekta, we were discussing about the importance of children who are in abusive atmospheres to get help. This is one of the things, that if abuse is normalized, if for the sake of control and under the guise of this is what the family quote unquote needs, so how will a person decipher or understand that it is unhealthy or it is not normal behavior?
Correct.
So that's the reason that they may look as if it is very normal for them, and that is why they seem as if they don't even understand. And that is where psychoeducation, counseling, and as Pearl and what all we have discussed, this is something which there is a recourse, there is an alternative to this, there is help that is awaited, but you have to reach out and get that help diligently. Do what the counselor says, be on the same page, understand what your behavior is, then definitely all this will change. But when the survivor looks at it as normal behavior, it is because nobody has questioned that behavior.
Right. So one of the things I would probably like to add to this is that there are checklists, or there are quizzes available online.
Yes.
Where you can go and actually do the quiz and assert it. See, it's more important for you not to normalize that behavior.
Yes.
And of course, your abuser may not sometimes know that they are being abusive. Yes, that is a fact. But it is important for you to know that it is not normal behavior and that is not something you would like to be associated with, and you deserve a loving and respectful environment. So do if there is doubt that a person doesn't understand whether they're being abusive or not, do check, do go through those checklists and do go through those quizzes and ascertain for yourself first. And once you stop normalizing it, it may be easier to see things a little differently. I hope that answers your question, Kulkarni. Then someone says, anonymous attendee says, why is abuser only abusive to his partner and not to others? Yes, this is a very good question. Thank you for asking it.
Go for it, Kavita.
Yeah, so that is, as we said, we also looked at how important it is for the abuser to have a very strong and very good, quote unquote, image socially, at work, and with his family, with her family, with the survivor's family. So it's that image that it's very important. Like, for example, if it's a narcissistic personality, it's anyway all about I, me, myself. So that image is very, very important to maintain. But in the four walls of the house is where his actual nature, traits, unhealthy coping mechanisms, and his innate definition of how a partner should be treated is played out. So it is only under the four walls, because he doesn't have to, he knows exactly what to do, what he needs to get back from a colleague or from a boss or from a subordinate. Those roles are very well defined. Okay, you go for an MBA course, you go for a, mentoring, you go for your team lead, you are a CEO, whatever you get all that. That's all done. But what you learn about how to be with your partner is coming from how your father treated his mother, your mother, or your mother treated your father. So that is where, that is the difference. They make a distinct difference between their social image and their personality in the four walls of the house. This is a very typical behavior of an abusive partner.
Yes.
What do you say, Paul?
Yes, absolutely. And just one point is, because they also groom their partner so well, and it's a perfect recipe for abuse. So that's all I can say. And you understood it.
Explain groom your partner, because you use the word groom. A lot of our attendees may not understand.
Groom in the sense, how to explain? It is like a very conditioning. I mean, each attempt is explained well. And for example, last webinar I told, if a person goes to a particular party or visits a particular person or friend or family, you see that this person at home doesn't eat food or doesn't speak to you after that. And slowly the partner realizes that my going to a certain place is disappointing him or her, and you start slowly. So the person also stops going to any place, or they stop speaking also. If somebody asks over the telephone, for example, your friend, if you say, why are you not calling? Nee, busy the, that's all. So he or she knows that this person will support you also.
Correct.
Almost to the extent that every police station you go, the constable will say, Amma, another 1 week and 2 weeks, they will want the case to be removed.
Right.
So they don't even try to take it seriously, because they think that they're helping the woman.
Correct.
Because anyway she wants to remove. So the person who is abusing her has, okay, go and tell at the police station, I don't have a problem. So
I'm not scared of
fear, that fear itself, that I might lose him, or something else might happen. That itself is grooming, where they slowly get into the skin of that abuse.
It's almost,
there's no more light being focused on that. Sorry, Kavita.
And it's also, saying that ghar ki baat ghar mein rehna chahiye. Otherwise, the abuser, even Ekta and Pearl, they get away with saying that tumhara izzat jayega.
I know.
It is so, you know, it's so ironic that they say, "Tumhara izzat jayega." You're going to be the one. So blatantly and so openly they will say it. So confident, because the woman, if it's a woman or a man who comes from a mindset that abuse needs to stay behind the four walls at any cost, is going to fall for that.
True, true, true. I think this is one of the things that, we face, when women come to us and say, "Arey, I don't want to file a case. What will people say?" So, you're always struggling in that situation because she is more worried about what people will say as opposed to having a healthy relationship. And that kind of, is a very worrying thing. And then when you go back into the background, you realize that a lot of this grooming would have happened to this person who is saying this. Okay, so a couple of things. I think we will stop the questions. We already have some 3 more questions to be answered. We won't be taking any more questions. One of the good things is Archana from My Choices Foundation. She has shared a lovely link, which is a link where you can visit it. It's a relationship quiz, healthy relationship quiz link. So please do click on that link and do definitely take that quiz. For any of you who are in a state of confusion or you don't understand what you're going through, this might be a very healthy and easy way to, kind of figure out what you're going through. So one of the questions which we were asked at the very beginning is, how do we know that we are safe? Most DV survivors are murdered by their husbands. So this is kind of...
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking this question, and sorry for making you wait till the end of the session. Safety is also a very important precaution which we run through very carefully with the client, whoever comes to us. So by default, whether she wants to be in the relationship or she wants to be out of the relationship, safety is focused upon like a lifeguard. And safety doesn't mean just one particular thing. Even to access certain safe mechanisms, like even to the reach out the police station, we need to remove that fear in our head that I cannot approach the police station, or some beliefs like even if you call, the police won't answer. So there are so many thoughts which we have gathered from the society, which are myths, which have to be broken. And for example, if you say, if you have to leave the relationship, the counselor would prepare you in case if you leave the relationship, how to be careful of your if they are educated crowd, how to be safe on the social media accounts, how to be not accessed into all of your private stuff like banks and other related stuff, whom to have relationship, whom to share what kind of information. Sorry to tell one incident where a client had come to us, and usually we talk only to the client, but this time her mother also was there. And that particular time I said, maybe your mother can wait outside. And the mother said, the client said, no, it's just my mother, so I just want to have her in the session. And the mother, after going back home, she has revealed the whole plan to her son-in-law. And Ekta, we can't hear you. You're muted. Okay.
I was just very shocked, Yes.
Yes. And so that it happens like that. So you need to be careful about with whom are you discussing, your phone chats, even bit of sharing with friends, how to handle your family pressures, how to handle your society pressures, because these are some places where people instantly will give details. And right now our digital footprint is so much that we need to be aware of ourselves in that area. And above all, any day, maybe one intimation to the police, at least a letter. That's what I understood with the relationship with the police is, at least they need to be intimated before.
Yes.
So that then that strikes a chord that the so-and-so person has told that she's fearful or she's apprehensive about someone. So we need not go only at the time of crisis to the police. We can go beforehand, give a letter, give a rundown of the situation, and also, especially if there are issues of custody, the school has to be very priorly informed about their issues, and the children have to be told what to do in what kind of circumstances. So it's a package, dear, whoever has asked, and but yeah, safety has to be the utmost thing.
Right. So I'm sharing a link, which is something that may help some of the people. If there's anyone who wants to leave a relationship, it's not just you get up one day morning and you decide to leave a
Absolutely.
relationship. There is a preparation required to leave an abusive relationship. You can click on the link. It's called Creating a Safety Net. It is about how you can reach out to different people. What are the things you can share? What are the things you need to do? So a little bit
Absolutely.
of pointers. It's a comprehensive list. It could help you if you're planning to leave. Also, I'm reminded, Pearl, of one of the incidences. Somebody reached out to me from the US, and what had happened to her is she was in an abusive relationship, and this was an Indian couple. And because of the fact that she was in an abusive relationship, she would keep calling her mother, and the mother kept telling her, no need to report. It doesn't look good. Don't do this. Don't do that. Karke, and the husband decided one fine day that he will just drop this girl home. And so he told her, your mom's not feeling well. Let me take you back to India. And he brought her back to India, and he left her at her mother's house. He stayed there for about 2 or 3 days. They had a very nice time. And the minute he left, he just disappeared. So he changed his phone number, he changed his address. He had been preparing for months to leave her at her mother's place and just disappear.
Absolutely.
And then it became so difficult because we had to reach out to the Ministry of External Affairs, we had to reach out to the Indian Embassy. And when she actually went to court finally, after a year and a half of not being able to trace this guy, they found him somewhere and kind of reached out to him. So they went through a very messy divorce case, and the first thing the judge asked her is, if you were in an abusive relationship, why did you not report? You should have spoken to somebody. You could have called a helpline, spoken to them. So we always tell people that if you're in trouble and you feel that you need help, if you reach out, it becomes documented. It is
Yes.
not about filing a report. You don't walk
Yes.
into a police station and the police doesn't say, come, we are waiting for you to file a report. It doesn't
Yes.
happen like that. When you walk into a police station and you inform them of what you're going through, sometimes they ask you to give a written application where you detail what you've been through. That always serves as a reference if you're ever looking at a divorce, because there's always that thing that you've been there, you've spoken about what you're going through. There are people who know about it. If you reach out to an NGO also, the NGO can vouch for the fact that yes, you did reach out to them. So do seek help. I mean, there's no shame in seeking help. Also, abuse is not your shame. Abuse is the shame of the abuser. And
Very
when
true.
we understand things as simple as this, and we kind of imbibe it in our behavior, and we know that whatever's happening is not my fault, it is that of the abuser. I think that is when we kind of feel more confident to go forward and talk to other people about it. But we are hoping that yes. Thank you, Padmini, for that comment, and thank you for actually speaking up. It
Very
takes
true.
a lot for, we know what it takes for people to actually come on and say that I have been through this, and I this is what has happened to me.
They
Complete
should.
complete
Yeah.
respect to
Very true.
survivors who come and reach out to us. I really bow down my head in respect, because it takes a lot of courage to come and reach out to someone and take help from. But please remember, there are so many organizations like us who are willing to help you and guide you through. And it is not just counseling. We have a full circle of support which is put in place, and which would help you.
And
Right.
each of us, we have to realize that each one who is watching, each one who is going through abuse also should know that they are so lovable, they're valuable, and nobody deserves abuse. I mean, no, not because of anything else, anything in the world should make them feel that they deserve abuse.
You could have done anything, but you have a right to lead an abuse free life. And nothing you would have done. Let anybody tell you anything. Let them make you look like as if you have no values, you have no character. That is their opinion. Just you please, the most important thing that a survivor needs to understand is she deserves an abuse free life.
Okay, so there's somebody called Xavier Jackson who's written a lot of women belong to the kitchen, women belong to the kitchen. Now,
Thank
Xavier, if you are there on the call, I don't know if you're doing this on purpose. Are you trying to derail the conversation, or are you trying to bring up a point for us to be able to understand that this is what abusers say? I'm not very sure, but the way you've written it, it kind of sounds that you don't agree that women should be empowered or move out, and if that's the case, I would very, very strongly condemn you. However, if you do believe that women deserve a better place, I think putting a comment like this doesn't make sense at all. I would request you not to kind of spoil this for the other people who are attending, because there are people who are actually seeking help or looking for this thing, and women know they do not belong in the kitchen. Definitely not. They belong everywhere, and they are doing successfully everywhere they're doing, and most of the countries that are being run by women are becoming the most successful countries. So Xavier, I don't know why you wrote those comments, and you should not. I strongly oppose a comment like this. And probably our last question for the day, and I'm sorry if I missed any question, is what is the role of alcohol in a violent relationship, and what % of women are affected with addictions in the family? Percentage might be a little difficult.
Percentage might be a little difficult to put it, but yeah, I want to say that the role of alcohol is there. I mean, there is a percentage, but not all alcoholics are abusive. Again,
yes.
For example, we just observed during the COVID period when the shops were shut. During our follow-up sessions, many said things are much better.
Right.
Though a little bit of either other, but non-availability of alcohol has reduced. But immediately after the lockdown has opened up, we slowly received, each counselor was telling that now I receive some, statements like alcohol after this lockdown, and again addiction has increased, and again abuse has increased. So there is a proportional chunk of relationship present, definitely. And that's the reason we said when they need to seek help, substance abuse specialist also has to be sought. That cannot be helped only through counseling.
Correct. Correct. I would also like to add this to what Pearl just said, is that alcohol is not responsible for abuse.
Absolutely.
It is not alcohol in isolation. It is always alcohol in addition to an abusive behavior trait that is responsible. Please do not blame
alcohol, neither COVID also.
Neither COVID, correct. Correct. So I think that is okay. And there is one last question. Sorry, I will just quickly take this. How do we know that the abuser won't take revenge?
Exactly as we just said, if we can make sure that we are safe and all the safety mechanisms have been followed through, or we made a proper rundown of the list, then at least we can see that it is in control. Yeah, but we still are not control of many factors. For that, each has to be done each time when a situation happens, because this revenge, this vendetta politics will be there. Some people can be very vengeful for another 10, 20 years also. Some might be like for some months and leave it, some few years and leave it. But if we know the redressal mechanisms wherever we can approach, so at least through a proper help, you will know at what time as to act how. So each time a threat like that comes up, you will not shiver like a leaf. Now this time you're so stronger. So each time also when the client becomes stronger, the perpetrator also puts more challenges. A
Correct.
lot of defamation take place. So at one point through all this journey, the survivor is so done with all those defamation and wherever. So we have seen, and we have beautiful clients with our counselors, when one road is blocked by the perpetrator himself, how beautifully the client looks out for another road
Avenue, yes.
avenue.
Yes.
So it's not just all the time about life and death, but I'm just talking about other aspects where they trouble them at their job, at their neighborhood.
Yes.
Some people had to shift houses
Yes.
continually.
Yes.
There is no life threat, but the defamation caused in the society. And when the society itself comes along with the client, or the client has informed the society members about the possible impending threat, so she's better prepared.
Correct.
The survivor is much better prepared to handle that revenge. And your courage itself is a proof that you are no more a victim.
Perfect. I think those are very, very positive words to end this webinar with. Your courage itself proves that you're no longer a victim. Thank you, Pearl, for that wonderful line. And our audience has been very, very faithful to us, and people have sat through the 1.5 hours today. And despite the fact that we still try to contain all of this within an hour, I think it didn't happen, but I'm glad that we could manage it in 1.5 hours today. And thank you so much for coming again, Pearl and Kavita, and sharing. See, these are very, very difficult details to find out for people who are facing domestic abuse. And details like this, when they are shared on a platform like this, it makes the dialogue much open for everyone and much more participative. And you can always go back and reflect on what was discussed. And of course, we are always there to reach out to. I shared the contact details at the beginning of the session. I made you listen to music so that you could focus on the contact details. And thank you very much. We will be ending the session now. We will catch up with you for another session. Do keep in touch with us, and we will definitely, bring more to you on this series of what we have. We have something else planned and up our sleeves. So bye bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Thank you,
good
Thank
day.
all
Thank
the
you, attendees.
participants.
Thank you, all
Thank you.
participants.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.